morning. So apparently, I have to talk to Reverend Harris about her definition of a few friends, because when she invited me to speak to a few friends on Sunday morning, I wasn't really expecting so many people. No pressure though. She promised me I only had 40 minutes, so I want to keep it short. All right, now you're listening, got it. Running a college program in 5 prisons in New York for almost 400 men and women is an interesting job, especially since there's no state and federal funding for it. So every single penny comes from people that care about this kind of work. Let me begin by saying that it's not easy to support things that are not popular. And the fact is that this church and this congregation has helped us launch, begin, and grow this program for 15 years. Now, I don't know if you've heard, but Governor Cuomo, I almost said Pataki, whew. Governor Cuomo recently admitted that he thought that this was a good idea, 15 years after you guys started it. When you look at the Gospels, there are so many references to prisons and the imprisoned and visiting prisons that there's an obvious biblical connection. For me personally, I'm drawn to the Jeremiah scripture. You see, I'm not just a director. I got into trouble when I was 16, and I found myself in a world I didn't know existed. I received a 24-year sentence, and when I got to A block, the largest cell block in the country, it was really tough to wrap my mind around the fact that I was going to be there for 24 years. As I was sitting there, like most of the men, feeling very sorry for myself, and quite frankly, pointing the finger at everyone else but myself, I didn't think about the things that I had done, how I had done them, who I had done them to. I did just the opposite, and I did a lot of blaming. And I remember thinking, Lord, how did I get here? Why would you do this to me? Of course, I know that that's not what happened. And a young man came to my cell. He was in charge of feeding those that didn't go out of their cells during the day. And he stopped in and he gave me a scripture, which I thought was an interesting thing to pass off between the cells. And it was Jeremiah. And it was talking about seeking the shalom of the city. Now, I knew I wasn't going to get through that one. What I didn't understand at that time was that the city was a prison, and that his whole people had been imprisoned. And that covenant that God's talking about was a covenant to free them from that prison. It was Jeremiah 29:11. I didn't understand it at that time. I was still pretty angry, to be honest with you. But years and years later, I was sitting in another cell in another prison. I lived in 9 different maximum security prisons over 16 years before I was finally released. But during that time, I got a chance to go to that program, the one that you support. And in all honesty, I only went to college because it was the one physical thing I could give my family. So I went to school not ever thinking I would get anything out of it. Most of the men that I had met in prison were so angry and bitter that they said, well, you could go to school, but it'll never help you. Understand that. Because when you get out of this place, the community you go back to will never forgive what you've done. And I started to believe that. But I went to school anyway. And while I went to school, I was able to get a bachelor's degree from Nyack College. It was the first thing my family had ever seen me complete. And just while I kind of thought, well, I was finished now, the president of New York Theological Seminary, that runs a graduate program at Sing Sing, said that there's an empty seat this year. And since you're just graduating, why don't you come and sit with us? And I remember telling my father that I was accepted to New York Theological Seminary. And he said, does that mean you'll be a priest? In concern. He was very concerned that I become a priest now. Obviously, in an Italian family, that's worse than going to prison. And I said, no, Dad, it's a graduate program run by the seminary, and it's free, which, as an Italian family, they heard free scholarship, and that was way more important than prison or priesthood. And I remember getting down to the classroom and opening that first textbook, and the professor talking about church history. Reference Jeremiah 29:11 as the opening scripture of a one-year accelerated degree granting program. Now, obviously, he piqued my attention, and a year later, I graduated with a master's degree in professional studies. That was 9 months before I was released after 16 years. When I walked out of that place, proud as I was to have a college degree, I never imagined I'd ever be able to use it. I never imagined that anyone in this room would look at me as anything ever than an ex-con. I went to what I knew best, and I was doing get your minds out of the gutter, I was doing construction in East Harlem. And I ran into one of the guys I was in school with, and he was wearing a suit and tie. And I have to admit, the first thing I thought is, what is he up to? But I found out he was working as a social worker. And he said to me, what are you doing with a tool bag? You have a graduate degree, and I could get you a job interview where I am. Now, if I knew what social workers were earning compared to the construction worker, I probably wouldn't be here today. But I became a social worker, and I got a second graduate degree from Hunter College in my MSW. Right about that time, I was asked to join the board of Hudson Link. For me, it was such a proud moment to actually have decision-making capability in the organization that gave me a second chance at life. I was on the board, serving proudly for about 2 years when we were expanding, and we were getting to the point where we needed a full-time director. And the board president, you might know him, Bruce McLeod, he called me and said, you know, can I see you after work? I'd really like to talk to you. I have something important to discuss. Now, when you get called to the principal's office, it's usually not good. So I immediately thought I had done something wrong at the board meeting. He said, we've been looking at resumes for 2 months. He said, all I can think about is how much better you would be at this job than everyone we've talked to. It was the scariest day of my life. Being at the helm of this organization is not about running college classes. It's not about raising the money for college classes. It's not about maintaining good relationships with the Department of Corrections that no one has a good relationship with. That's not funny. It's about 400 men and women that don't believe they have a second shot, deserve a second shot, or can get a second shot. And then they talk to me and find out I sat in that cell, in that school seat, and walked that same walk. I wasn't there for 4 months. I was there for 16 years. And if there is anybody that deserves a second chance, it's them. But it's not easy, and they have to work for it. I'm one of 5 boys. I'm the only one that's gone to college, but I'm also the only one that's ever been in trouble. My mother will constantly say to my brothers, can't you be more like Sean? He went to college. But Mom, he did it in prison. You gotta love the Italians. It is the one thing that levels the playing field in this world we live in. It's the one thing that changes where you've been and gives you a new direction on where you're going. But it's not easy. Going to college in prison with manual typewriters, no internet, an antiquated library, but professors that care is challenging but worth it. And one thing that I've found since going back to school, now since I've been home, is it's the real deal. Because when I got accepted to Hunter College for that MSW, I was scared to show up. None of us wants to look like a dummy in that classroom. But I found myself walking through that graduate program like it was nothing. And when I got arrested, I was only in the 9th grade. So if there was only one thing that influenced how I was going to do in college, it was the work that I had accomplished in prison. And I love to share that with these young men and women that are in the program that don't think they can do college-level work. I've brought some friends with me today, and during the coffee hour, I hope you'll help say hello, pack some school supplies, and see what the face of formerly incarcerated people might look like. Because we're a lot like you, and we want to come back to this community to help it, and to work with it, and to enrich it in a way that sometimes you need a little past to make a better future. Thank you.